Hi, it's Todd from Todd's Workshop and Todd Cutler here, and I'm back with...
Matt Easton, Schola Gladiatoria.
We just filmed a film about the Swiss sabre, which is a slightly peculiar longsword. I've got a slightly peculiar short sword, the Storta. So, Matt, take it away.
So it's a falchion, isn't it?
It's a falchion. Storta,
Yeah.
fancy Italian name for a falchion because they can't be like anybody else, presumably.
But it's beautiful, isn't it? So, I mean, the first thing it reminds me of is there's a famous example in the Wallace collection, the Medici one,
Yes.
which is very similar
It's
size.
got a
And
face on the shell, on the
I
guard.
can't honestly remember. I remember it's got lots of gold on it and some on the blade as well.
Yeah.
But that's a very famous example, but it's quite a similar overall size and shape and
Yeah.
design to this, isn't it? And yeah, I mean, I guess this is the 16th century descendant of the falchion, isn't it? Really?
Well, 17th. I think that's early 17th. I think,
Right, is
from
it?
Memory, I
Right,
think
okay.
so.
So it's a late
Yeah.
descendant of the medieval falchion.
But I mean, that's interesting in itself, actually, because they sort of went out of fashion, I think, because I can't think of anything around 1500 that was like this. But then they seem, or 1550, sorry. But then they seem to come back in again. I don't know if that was the case or I'm imagining it. But...
I think that forms of falchion were always kind of there. They were always present, and we do see it in art sometimes, right the way through the 15th century and into the early 1500s. But most of those were not as fancy as these, and it is an interesting question of why, especially in the age of side swords and early forms of what became rapiers, and why were people carrying as a high status version of a sword? Why were they carrying falchions again?
Well, I'm going to stop you there on when you said fancy, right? So, yeah, the grip is kind of fancy. But the blade here as well is kind of fancy. It's just multi-fullered, pointlessly so, really. I'm just going to show you that. You see, try and get the reflections there. There's an awful lot going on. It's a fighting blade, though. Don't think that it's not. It's a proper blade. But this, actually, is incredibly simple as a blade form for a Storta. Absolutely the most complicated blades that I know of are Storta blades. You look through a book like Armi Bianchi Italienne, and the blades on the Stortas there are just the maddest things that you have ever seen. So this is tame in comparison. What was going on?
I mean, although they're a very different shape, they remind me a little bit of the Cinque Dea. And the complexity of the fullers and stuff going on in there. So I think there was something going on in the 16th, or end of the 15th and into the 16th.
Maybe it's just Italian blade makers could make them, and nobody else could.
Maybe, yeah, yeah. I mean, they had water-powered grinding wheels at that point, didn't they? So possibly they were playing around with what they could do with fullers and the complexity there, and showing off.
No, because you are right actually with the Cinque Dea, because yes, that has fullers on it again. Ridiculously, pointlessly
and this blades. Up here at the end here, that very much reminds me of a Cinque Dea, where you've got these side by side parallel and tapered fullers as well, and that must be really difficult to do.
Yes, it was. I'll actually be straight up with you there. I was trying to do something else and I messed the something else up.
Oh, right.
And I had a last ditch before ruining the blade.
Oh no!
Attempt, and thankfully I got it.
Well, it came
then
off
I had to repeat on the other side.
Right? Yeah. Okay. But it came off looking intentional, and it looks really, really good. And it absolutely is very much like you find on the Cinque Dea, where the whole blade is divided up into segments of fullers, basically, isn't it? But actually, from a functional point of view, it is still. It's a falchion. The blade is very similar to certain types of Langmesser as well. Obviously, the hilt is a sword hilt, so it's not a knife hilt. It's not a Langmesser hilt. And you could say, I know there's some debate about this, the division between what's a falchion and what's a Langmesser. Partly it's just language. One's a French word and one's a German word.
I'm pretty sure nobody bothered back.
No, and we often see them referred to in period sources just as a sword. In terms of traditional, what people think of as the construction method, this is a pommel, a grip and a guard, and the fact that the guard, interestingly, because we're talking about the Langmesser, it does have a projection on the side, which has a parallel in the German Langmesser of the Nagel, which is probably or possibly where this shell started from. Because we see forms of nagel or nagel, I think. I'm not very good at German.
Nagel.
Yeah. We see them expanding into a shell shape, and then they grow and you get this whole big shell. But that shell's interesting because it's downwards, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that becomes an interesting point, because you think of rapiers and so on, and the shell is up and protecting the hand much more. really is enclosing the hand very often. And here it's downward much more as a sword catcher style feature.
Yeah.
Not that common on Stortas, but nonetheless it's an interesting thing. But it does have the advantage that when it is sitting on your hip,
yeah,
everybody sees the interesting bit.
Yeah, and rain doesn't catch in it.
Yeah. Although this is something that I've also wondered. So this is dated around 1600. Yeah. And if you come across a class of sword, and I think that they are called carters' swords. Have you heard of them?
No.
So if I can borrow that, and I've wondered if this, because of course we don't have the scabbard that ever went with the sword.
Yeah.
But I think they're called carters' swords, and they're short, handy, single-edged fighting blades.
Yeah.
But they have a guard here that's very often like a cup. And when I say a cup, flat on the top and a rim, and it goes over the cartridges that you are storing in the top of your scabbard to keep the rain out.
Oh, right.
And so you have your pre-charged cartridges for your blunderbuss or whatever else it is you've got. And it's the guard of the sword. I've got to make one day. Yeah. The guard of the sword that goes over the cartridge pack.
And so some of these swords had buy knives and eating sets and other stuff on the outside of the knife. And I think possibly sometimes these were associated with hunting. And certainly in artwork, we sometimes see forms of, these can also be known as dussac or dussage at this period. So we see forms of this general type of sword used in many different contexts, in war, in travelling, famously in the 17th century used by pirates, forms of dussac. So I think lots of people carried generally this type of sword, you know, relatively short sword with quite a lot of cutting potential in many different contexts, and one of those is in a hunting context, and we sometimes see them as sidearms in that scenario, which is when you might have the eating sets and the buy knives and all that kind of fancy stuff on the side of the scabbard. But then when we get into 17th and 18th century hunting swords, you could say that maybe they're the descendants of these, of the dussac and the Storta and the bow and ver and the so-called peasant knives. And it's interesting that some of those do have a downward sloped, not cup, but a kind of a shell essentially on the side, like you were describing. Yeah. And I think it's also worth mentioning that the Medici one is like this, and it curves down towards the blade. Yeah. Whereas a lot of what people typically think of as a dussac or dussage, the shell curves up and over the hand, and some of them actually curve a long way around and cover the whole back of the hand, but they still have the quillons on there. Yeah. And I think that's where the people's common idea of the pirate cutlass comes from. Often in movies they show actually a half basket or bowl guard, which is the 19th century.
Yes, it's much more
end of the 18th century thing. Yeah. And it's completely wrong for 17th century pirates, but
not for films. It's not.
No, not for films where they have épées as cut hilt rapiers. But the dussac with that form of quite big shell on one side, I think, is where the perception of the pirate sword comes from, and that's related to this type of.
Yeah,
Storta.
I mean, a pirate wouldn't wear this. It would look all wrong in a film, but probably in real life. But one thing to note here, actually, is the construction of the hilt and the material. So I'll just show it up to camera.
Sure.
So if we look here, all of the shell guard, the actual guard itself here is all in steel. Steel detailing here over a shark skin grip, but then a bronze pommel that's really quite big. Now, I was saying, Matt, that the blade is fancy as you like, but it is still very much a fighting blade. It's a real thing. If that had a pommel that size, it would just be totally unwieldy. So in fact, that's hollow. So it's fabricated up out of, 4 different components, which again is, how the original must have been done, because anything solid at that size just would have been unworkable. So you end up with, I haven't actually weighed this, but you end up with a small sword, but one which is nicely balanced, comfortable, and definitely very handy.
Yeah. And it's quite lively in that, it's got a lot of distal taper. It's quite a thin blade up here. So it's quite a lively blade. And for its size, it probably looks to you as a heavier object than it actually feels in my hand. Hollow pommels are a thing which go all the way back into the medieval period, of course. And I think that there was, across a broad period, there was a desire to have a large pommel, but you don't want the mass of a solid object. But they must have had their reasons for wanting to have that big wheel pommel. It could have just been the look of it. It could have been that...
Yes, there'll be a reason.
It prevents the hand sliding off. It gives a really good hand stop at the bottom. I think it's both of those things. And I think when you've got such a broad blade, you actually want quite a broad pommel for it to look right.
Visually set it, yeah. Yeah, so it could be as simple as that. I mean, intellectually, making anything hollow when it could be solid is harder. So if it was just a performance thing, they would have made it solid and smaller. So I think it has to be combined with the style thing. And yes, it is a very broad blade. And there's a couple of sort of reenactment blades made by some of the famous makers that I can think of where they have very small pommels where they've obviously gone for exactly that, and they just look awful. Look awful.
Yeah, and it's difficult to explain why, but a pommel that's not big enough does make a sword very ugly, doesn't it? And
it does.
And they were just as, you know, if you're in a shop spending a lot of money on a fancy sword, they're just as likely to succumb to what looks nicer as we are. And I think there are certain things which just naturally look better. I think another thing as well to viewers might not realise is that the decoration is concentrated on the surfaces that are seen. And the surfaces that are not seen are smooth. So the quillons have got these beautiful flutes in, but the back of the quillons don't, and then the shell has this decoration here where you're going to see it, but is just rough forged underneath, which is just like the original.
This is a prime example that it's one of the things I'm obsessed about is if it doesn't show, don't spend your money on it. So that's the outside, but it's curved. You can get files into that relatively easily. If you look on the inside there, it's concave rather. Okay, so it's concave. Now it's hammered. Well, it's a bit ugly. If you look at it, that's fine. I like the finish. But the point is, to file that, to get that in, to get stones in there, would be one hell of a job to make that clean and nice. Easy on the curved convex outside, hell on the concave inside. Why do it? So they didn't.
And so the scabbard follows that as well, where you've got the decoration on the outside. The insides of the scabbard are just functional, what need to be there to hold everything together. But you've got a lot of decoration on all of the suspension straps and the outside sort of structure that the mounts, the steel mounts. And again, a very interesting shape on there that's quite reminiscent of the...
It is. Well, so this is shaped very similar to the one that I did for the Swiss sabre in the last film, and this I in fact made beforehand, and this was effectively a tester piece for it, because they're going to the same customer again, this and the Swiss sabre. So this was a tester piece just to work my way through, because I don't usually fabricate shapes in this way, so I just wanted to feel my way into it really.
So this is a wood-lined scabbard, isn't it? It's not just leather and metal, it has a wooden liner inside it.
Yeah, so it has a poplar core in there, which is a standard kind of wood. Poplar and birch were standard for scabbards. Very thin leather outer. So you do end up with something stiff. You know, if you fall on it, it will break. The whole thing about leather scabbards, it's much more of a reenactment fighting thing, because you fall over on it all the time and you break it. Well, you break this, you go back to the scabbard maker again, and it's not a problem. The difficulty with having leather scabbards is they tend to bind the blade a lot more. And so having a slightly loose wood cord scabbard is just the way to go, especially if you imagine, 2 days of rain. It's not going to work.
Well, and from my experience with 19th century swords, I can tell you the other problem with just leather scabbards is they have a huge amount of, they just soak up the water and they make the blade rust. And there are various accounts of blades getting stuck in leather scabbards. And in fact, I myself have freed antique swords from leather scabbards that were just rusted into them. And there's references from the Crimean War of them just basically disintegrating and with the points of the blade sticking out of the bottom of the scabbards. So.
Well, you see that too. There's a lovely Jura woodcut of, is it 3 peasants going to market or something, or 3 men going to market? I can't remember the name of it. And one of them, very much has got that much of his sword sticking out the end of his scabbard.
Which obviously your friends aren't gonna. It's not gonna make you very popular because you'll keep stabbing them in the ankles, I should think. So, but and absolutely gorgeous. So, very much a falchion in a fighting sense, very much like earlier centuries ones, but with that contemporary, later period aesthetic. And I think it's absolutely beautiful.
So, talk me through how it feels, Matt.
It's got a lot of authority in the blade, but it's not heavy. It's not, it moves quickly, but you know that when that hits something, it's going to impact with a lot of force. But interestingly, people often think about these as cutting weapons. And of course, primarily, I suppose they are. They're optimized for the cut. But that's got a very effective point that's in line with the grip. So as thrusting weapons, they're perfectly good as well. And they're going to have a lot of penetrative capacity to them because they've got a fair amount of mass behind the blade. The point is essentially a clipped point, so the point is in line with the central axis.
Well, your target will be unarmoured as well. Possibly a secret or something, but essentially unarmoured.
And one of the great things about this style of blade is it will penetrate and not go too deep. which has some advantages to it, because of course when you stab a target, your basic choices are either to carry on going and grapple with them, or if you've got a dagger in your left hand, to use that as well, or to back out and defend yourself, because a person doesn't stop trying to hurt you when they're stabbed. They will try and stab you back. So having the ability to have this go into the target and then quickly get it out again and do something else is really, really useful. But yeah, the way it tracks through the air, as I say, the indexing and the edge alignment is really, really good. You can feel where the edge is at any moment and turn it to come in from a different angle. It's very, very nice.
So I'm not going to let you hit the traditional thing that people think falchions should be used for, which is pruning trees, apparently. And I remember, my early days as a reenactor uttering the same words of, well, falchion, half knife, half axe.
These, as this demonstrates, are often quite thin blades. And I think because people see something that's very broad, they don't account for the fact that it's also thinner very often than a straighter, narrower sword. So if you just plough this edge into something very hard, you're actually more likely to take edge damage on this than you would be with something like certain types of rapier, which actually have more meat behind the edge. So this is really optimized towards cutting meat, really, to be frank about it. Cut through clothes, cut through meat. Very, very effective against likely armoured or non-armoured opponents. And there's a reason these were very popular through the Langmesser and later with the Dussac and certain types of peasant knives. Is why they were very, very popular in civilian settings.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you stopped now. But thank you very much, Matt.
No,
absolute pleasure, because you reveal things about these that I don't know and I don't understand, because I make them, but I don't have that depth of knowledge of handling that you do. So it's just enormously useful, but really a great pleasure. So
no, I mean, the pleasure's all mine. And I should, hasten to point out, I'm not a specialist on this particular type of sword, and there are specialists out there who will probably say a lot more things about this type of sword, particularly about the use of the false edge, which is a very interesting thing with these swords and very prominent in the treatises or manuals that we see them being used at, and also the way that shell is used in binding actions against an opponent's blade, which enables you to come in with the point while pushing aside the other person's blade and things like this. So the whole design of the weapon is very much intended for use, and it's very, very interesting.
Yeah. Absolute pleasure, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd.
Good to see you again. Cheers. Thank you.